Hi everybody, how y'all doing? This is Carla Y. Nix with a segment of my weekly inspirational message. Do you draw people or drive people away? And I'm speaking in general, especially as it relates to the church and church folks and church members. Um, there was a conversation where someone told someone that they are inspired and encouraged by the way that they operate. A Christian, okay, the person is a Christian, and that person is hesitant about attending church, for example, or being around different people because they know that people will talk about them and what have you that's in disagreement about them. Okay. And I've spoken about church hurt before. This is a part of that. And the truth is, instead of drawing people to the church, too often we drive people away. Now, some people don't want to come to church because they don't want to hear about sin and different things. But that is part of the message. But it's another thing when we, the church, don't live and love like Christ. We can show our love. Is it's one thing. There's nothing wrong with speaking to people about certain things. What come from what the word says. It's not even about your own feelings. It's about the word and living like Christ. That's one thing. But it's another thing when you're beating people over the head and you're putting them down, and making them feel unloved and unwelcome. Now, when you judge, because we do judge, but we can't make, or we shouldn't make, a person feel like their sin is greater than your sin. Now I'm just saying it because sin is sin, and we all have sinned, and we all still sin. I love how it was stated in, I think, our Sunday school lesson. It said about being a saved sinner. A lot of people in the church don't want to admit that they are sinners, but we all sin. We may not all sin the same, but we do. Now, we should be sinning like my pastor in New Orleans used to say, I'm not sinless, but I ought to be sinning less. Yes, we shouldn't drive and thrive and waddle in sin. We should continually ask God to lead us and guide us and strengthen us. And the Bible even tells us that there is no temptation, for example, no temptation that God has not given us an escape from. So it is possible for us not to sin. But as Christians, we are saved and we do sin. So I can't be saying your sin is worse than mine. Uh, the act might be huge and terrible. I'm like, I've never murdered anybody. That's a terrible sin. But so is lying. So is, you could just name a lot of things that people do that nobody else knows about. Or they might know about it and you don't care. But it's still sin. And it still needs to be dealt with. But we as a church, We need to love like Christ. We need to love people for who they are and their value and their work. They are valuable. I don't care what predicament you're in. I don't care what your life is, what your lifestyle is. I don't care what your situation is. You are still valuable. Who am I to invalidate somebody? Who are you to invalidate somebody? God created us all, and He wants to be your father. He's not your father until you accept Christ as your Savior. People saying we're all God's children. No, we're not all God's children. And it's not because of whatever your sin is. The sin that keeps you from being His child is not accepting Christ. Okay? But He created all of us. And He made us wonderful. Wonderfully made. Wonderfully and fearfully made. We all have value. He loves us all. Yes, He does. So His love for me is definitely not greater than His love for you, and vice versa. So let's be careful and love one another. We can teach and we can preach and we can train and what have you, but we shouldn't draw people. We shouldn't drive people away. We should draw people to Christ. We should draw people to fellowship and worship. We shouldn't push them away. People shouldn't feel stressed and hesitant about going to the house of worship or to a church family. That's not like Christ. That is not like Christ. So, but we can do it individually as well, because that building is just a building, but the church is us. We are the church. How are we treating people? How are we showing Christ's love? How are we blessing people? How are we helping people? We should work beyond those four walls. In fact, the church has no walls. The work is outside of those walls. Okay? So don't drive people away. Draw them. And people will see you. People are paying attention to you. People are watching you. People are listening to you. Are you driving them away or drawing them? Yes, it matters. It matters how you function and operate and how you treat people. That's a big deal. That is a big deal. You can be the hindrance or the obstacle or the stumbling block or the wall that keep people away from accepting and learning about Christ. Who wants to go somewhere where they don't feel accepted? Nobody wants to be somewhere where they're not wanted. But too often that is the church. The church, like the hospital, is for people who are coming to get treatment. The hospital is a place for people who need the doctor. The church should be the safe haven, the place for people to come for spiritual healing, for fellowship one with another, for public worship, to be fed and taught by God's pastor. That's what the church is for. It's not for foolishness. It's not for anything secular. It's not for a show. And you don't have to look a certain way to be amongst the church, to be in the midst of. You don't have to look a certain way. You should be appropriate, obviously, because that's respect to God. But, this person sitting next to me not going to look like me, and I'm not going to look like them. I used to have a problem in my mind that I didn't look like what I thought, uh, or what was portrayed to me as what a minister's wife should look like. That, that's not my style. Now, I'm not going to ever be inappropriate, but I'm not always looking like a first lady or another minister's wife. I'm much more relaxed and what have you. But it doesn't change who I am. It doesn't change my faith. It doesn't change my worship, you know. And I cannot let that keep me away. So let's learn to love like Christ and act upon that love. Be careful not to drive people away, but be careful to draw them in to the truth, to God's love. Let them see Christ in you. And let me leave you with these words. When Jesus says, "What you've done to the least of them, you've done unto me."